Um, just a couple things before we begin. Many of you, I'm sure, have been on before, and I've learned with you before, so welcome back. And for those that are new that I haven't yet learned with, welcome. Glad you joined. There are a couple things I want to say just about the way that the 45 minutes work when I'm here. I'm just going to change my screen here for a second. Okay. So I generally don't see the chat while I am teaching. I will try and every now and then take a quick look, certainly be curious what you have to say, but I can't often really, watch for raised hands and share what I want to without with also paying attention to the chat. So I wanted to mention that if there's something that you want me to see, I actually will share my email and I'll ask Mara to write it in the chat. And just, give me a few days to get back to you. But if there's something that you didn't get to say, or you're very eager to share, but you think I may not see it, my email is Abby, ABBY, at explorejewish.com, explorejewish.com. So you are welcome to email me if you'd like. And the other thing that I just want to mention, that if folks are interested, and I will just try and put this in the chat, I also do teach a weekly Parsha Torah portion class on Zoom on Wednesday nights. So if folks are available, you want to join on a Wednesday night, you can go on to the 92nd Street, the 92 NY website, and you're welcome, of course, to be very glad to welcome you on a Wednesday night also. So with that all said, welcome. As Mara and I talked about at the beginning, it is a new sefer, a new book in our 5 books of the Torah. We are reading this week from Parashat Shemot, the Torah portion of Exodus, the very beginning of the book of Exodus. And as many of you very likely know, this is the book of slavery, of redemption, of Sinai, of the 10 Commandments, of the building of the tabernacle, the giving of additional laws, and we're just starting today. So I want to start with an outline, and I'll share my screen in just a moment, and I want to give an overview of the Torah portion. And then I want to hone in on some theology. So we do have a challenging task ahead of us today. Some of you may have looked at the Torah portion already. There's a really famous line in the Torah portion, and I'll show it to you, but I'll just say it right now. Eheyeh asher eheyeh. God says, I will be what I will be, or it's sometimes translated as, I am what I am. So we will try and unpack that. Not an easy task, but we're going to do our best today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I think Mara also put in the chat a PDF of the source sheet, so you can look on your own also. Let me share my screen. Okay, I'll make that bigger. Just bear with me. Oh, yeah, 1 second. Okay, here we go, making it much bigger. And I'll make the size bigger also momentarily. But again, as I mentioned, I want to just start with an overview of the Torah portion itself. The Torah portion is basically chapters 1 through 5. And as some of you already may know, the Israelites grow and multiply so much so, and there's a new Pharaoh, a new leader in Egypt who does not know Joseph, meaning he doesn't know that this Hebrew, this Israelite at one time was beyond instrumental, led the country, led the state through a famine and maybe through some questionable means that you might have studied before, but nevertheless allowed the Egyptians to live 7 years of a famine. And this new Pharaoh doesn't know Joseph. So the Israelites become oppressed in various ways, and there's so much to analyze here. So I really encourage you to read more commentaries on your own about some of the things we don't discuss. Moses is born and thrown into the river by his mother so that he can be saved. And eventually, Pharaoh's daughter finds him. He's raised in the palace, presumably in some ways with Pharaoh as his father or grandfather. And even though it doesn't say that anywhere in the text, we can kind of drash, we can interpret that a little bit. And eventually Moses, he somehow knows he's a Hebrew, and he sees an Israelite or a Hebrew as an Egyptian fighting. And he is angry and he wants to save the Israelite, the Hebrew. And he's forced to leave the country because other people will find out who he is. And he eventually encounters God in Midian, where he flees to, where he's married, and where he gets married. And at this burning bush, God reveals God's self and says, listen, like, I'm the God of your ancestors, and I have a job for you. And there are, depending on how you read it, 4 or 5 protests, which are fascinating. Moses says, like, no, I can't do it for this reason. And God's like, no, you really can't. And again, Moses says, no, it's not for me. And finally, God says, hey, I'll give you Aaron. And Moses is like, fine, I'm good to go. So I really encourage you to read those protests and responses. They're really fascinating. Moses eventually, with Aaron, goes to Pharaoh and says, listen, you got to let my people go worship in the desert. Not, you got to let them go to freedom, but you got to let them go worship in the desert. And Pharaoh is angry, makes work more demanding for the Israelites, and the Israelites also then are angry. And that's where we leave off. And it's not until chapter 6 that we begin making our way through the plagues. And that's your summary. That's the summary of our Parsha. So it's really unbelievable sometimes, I think, how much is packed into one Parsha. I don't know, for some reason, even when I go to the Torah portion, I'm like, oh, and I want to pull out one issue. I'm like, oh my God, there's so many other things that we can talk about. So a Parsha is, I think reading a Parsha a week is great if you're able to do it, but just, if you take one issue even within each Torah portion, I think that's great, because often, like this week, it is packed. So with that all said, let me pause and take a couple of, if there are any questions, I'll take 1 or 2 questions or reflections that are brief, just to make sure others get to share on just on the overview of the Torah portion, on beginning of the book of Exodus, if there's anything before we dive into some theology. So any questions at all or reflections on the overview on what happens in this week's Torah portion?
Abby, thank you so much. We are getting a few comments about the source sheet. I'm actually having trouble attaching the PDF. Do you mind dropping the Google Doc link into the chat?
I will do that. Let me just stop the share. I'm going to just make it accessible. That's okay. I'm going to make it, thank you. I'm going to make it accessible for everyone. I'm going to just share it as like an unrestricted document for the class, and then I will change that afterwards.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure. So I'll just ask everyone, please do not write in the document while we're accessing it. Hold on a second. Should work. Okay, I just saw 2 comments. One, how does Moses know he's a Hebrew? We don't know. It's one of the mysteries of the story. And I would really encourage you, that it's so fascinating. If you read the story sort of and ask yourself, what's the perspective of each character? What do they know? What does Moses know? There's so many interesting family dynamics that you could surmise that we just don't know. We have to drash, we have to interpret. So I'll leave that to you to kind of look at. And I saw one more thing, but I don't remember what it was. So let me pause and say, I see Christina, and I just want to double check. I first want to ask, are there questions on the overview itself of the Torah portion? Christina, if that's your question, I will call you. Okay, Christina, you can go ahead and unmute unless I have to do that for you.
Hi, yes. So I really, this is my first year going through the weekly portions and everything. And from an overview perspective, like you were saying, coming into this, and nobody really, remembering Joseph, and then, like that other question, how does Moses know, that he's Hebrew and who God is? And, I think that really resonates today with, people searching for Hashem and really like asking, of ourselves, like, who are we and how do we know who Hashem is in this time when there's so much, disparity and just randomness, like everywhere, all over the place. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, very interesting, Christina. I want to kind of maybe reframe your comments a little bit more, or a little differently, because you said, based on the parallel that we don't really know how Moses knows he's a Hebrew, you're suggesting, in a parallel way, in today's world, we also ask ourselves, what is our identity? Who am I? And also, I think you took it a step even further, where Moses encounters God and is trying to understand God. Moses says, what's your name? And we'll see that in a few moments. What do I tell the Israelites? And so we also ask, what is God to us? And in fact, that's what we're doing today. So thank you so much for that framing. Very beautiful way to begin. One more question or reflection about sort of the big picture here before we dive in. Tanya.
Okay. I just want to make the comment that I think it's interesting that the book of Shemot is the book of names, and that goes along with, the identity question, because it starts off with the names of the people who came from Israel, and God is constantly introducing himself throughout the book.
Yes, very interesting. So we normally think of the names as a reference to the names of the people that went down to Egypt. But actually you're saying right here in the third chapter, we encounter the question of, well, what is God's name? So that's also very beautiful framing. Thank you very much for that. Okay, thank you, Tanya, and the person who came before Tanya, whose name is escaping me. I apologize. So you can write that in the chat. So thank you to you both. Okay, so we are going to dive in now to our theology. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of text reading. We may read all the way through verse 22. I'll make this bigger, but we may not. We may just read a little bit. I am going to ask someone to be the reader. Definitely not me today. And I want us to think about, as was already mentioned by others, and also I will echo that, and I think I mentioned earlier, based on chapter 3, based on the verses that we read, I want us to think about, how do we understand the God expressed in these words, and the words and the verses and the phrases that follow. And I think it's fair to say right away there are different names being used. So how do we understand and make sense of each of those names, and which speaks most to us, which speaks least to us? So who would like to be our reader? Okay, I see Mark. Thank you. So Mark, I'm going to ask you to read from verse 1 through verse 15. And I may interject multiple times, so you'll bear with me.
As long as you scroll, I'm with you.
Okay, I'll scroll. Thank you for reminding me that I have to scroll. Okay, here we go.
Shall read. Now Moses, tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, drove the flock into the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Moses said, I must turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. He answered, Here I am. And he said, Do not come closer. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. I am, he said, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And the Lord continued, I have marked well the plight of my people in Egypt. I have heeded their outcry because of their taskmasters. Yes, I am mindful of their sufferings. I have come down to rescue them from the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the region of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. Moreover, I have seen how the Egyptians oppress them. Come, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, and you shall free my people, the Israelites, from Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt? And he said, I will be with you. That shall be your sign, that it was I who sent you. And when you have freed the people from Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. Moses said to God, When I come to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. He continued, Thus shall you say to the Israelites, Ehyeh sent me to you. And God said further to Moses, Thus shall you speak to the Israelites, The Lord Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This shall be my name forever, this my appellation for all eternity.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mark. As we can see, Mark is a Cantor. You have a booming voice, Mark. Thank you so much for reading that. Okay, so let me just very briefly summarize. As you heard, Moses makes his way, he encounters this burning bush, he hears God say, Moses, Moses, and he says, Here I am. And many of you also might know, in Hebrew, here I am is hineni, which is a word that's repeated throughout the Hebrew Bible when there's an encounter between either two people or God and a person, and the person is saying, like, I am present. Here I am. Hineni was used in the Binding of Isaac story also. So I'm trying to think of where else off the top of my head. I think Abraham in another context, I can't remember. In any case, a key word about being present. And Moses is a little overwhelmed by God's presence, and God introduces God's self as the father of Moses' fathers, the God of the forefathers. And there are some theological questions you could ask here. Why is God in verse 7 just now noticing the plight of the Israelites? But we're not going to address that today. So God says, I've noticed what's going to happen. This is what's happened. This is what's going to happen. And Moses, and you're the one, you're going to do it. You're going to bring my people from Egypt. And as you can see, here's the first protest. Moses is like, but mi anochi, who am I? Like, why should I be the leader? And God answers, which doesn't really seem like an answer. Ki ehyeh imach, I will be with you. In other words, you could say, well, Moses is saying, like, why should I do this? And God is like, don't worry, you're not alone. We're partners. And this word ehyeh imach comes up, as we're going to see in the famous line, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. Here, the word does seem to mean, I will be with you. I am a partner. I am a sense of support for you. And then Moses says, like, listen, I don't know what the Israelites are going to ask me. They might say, what's the God's name? And God says, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, and then says again, well, just my nickname, Ehyeh, sent me to you. And then God continues, also tell them, I'm the God, I'm Yahweh, Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh, the name we're not supposed to say, but I do say in learning context, where I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that's my legacy. That's from generation to generation. That's my name. That's how I'm called. So it's fascinating because, by the way, also I listened to a podcast earlier in the week, a Hadar podcast. Rabbi Eli Kamfer was talking about this formula and how the formula is used in the Amidah, in the standing prayer, at least 3 times a day, and it's sort of connects us to the burning bush experience, which is fascinating to think about. In any event, we've encountered now several names of God or several descriptions of God. I'm the God of your ancestors. I'm Ehyeh. I am something like I will be with you. I will be what I will be. So I want us to take a look at, and if somebody scrolls ahead on the source sheet, you're going to see, hopefully we'll have some time, at least we're going to look at one classical commentary, at least, Rashi, and if we have time, Sforno. I'm going to try and pull it all together afterwards with that an adaptation from the Eitz Chaim Chumash commentary, the Chumash, the Hebrew Bible that's used in many conservative synagogues, which has an excellent commentary. So I want to ask you first, though, and I'll take a couple of responses here. What do you make of these 3 different ways of describing God? God of our ancestors, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I will be what I will be, and just the shortened version, Ehyeh. What do you make of one or all of them? And please try and keep your responses brief so that others can share. As you can see, there's a lot of rich material here. So does anyone want to jump in with how you understand these 3 ways of describing God? Or if you like, just Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, just that one kind of mysterious phrase. Okay, I see Jay Ritt and Cantor Neil Schwartz. Hi, Neil Schwartz. So I know Neil from both. So Jay, do you want to go first? Can you share your thoughts on it?
So it's interesting. Ehyeh is the imperfect tense, as I understand it. And imperfect tense doesn't always mean future. It means an action that has not been completed. Mm. So in my mind, does this mean that God's is still evolving who God is? Mm-hmm. Not that I will be, but is still evolving.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And if you peeked ahead, you might have seen that the Eitz Chaim Chumash quotes Eric Fromm, who talks about a God of becoming, just beautiful. And in the same way, we, in many contexts, we like to quote Genesis 1 that says that human beings were created in God's image. And so in the same way that you could start with either one, but we evolve, our task in life is to change, to evolve, to grow. And that's God's task also. God does not stay the same. God is dynamic. So thank you very much, Jay. Cantor Neil Schwartz, would you like to also share your sense here?
That God is inherently unknowable. Lower my hand there. God is inherently unknowable. And even, I will say, in my own life experience, I would vouch for the fact that God appears differently to different people, even sometimes to the same person. God appears differently to different groups, and even sometimes within the same group. Witness the various ways God has interacted with the Jewish people for all these thousands of years at different times. And to me, that's so encompassed by I will be what I will be.
Great, beautiful.
I will be different for each of you at different times.
Beautiful. Okay, so we have a diversity, diverse expressions of God over time. I'll say I even have a class. It's called Diverse Expressions of God Over Time. So thank you both so much for getting us started. God as a becoming God, as a growing God, God as not only unknowable, but is manifesting God's self at different times. I want to take a look at each of these three descriptions before we go on to Rashi and maybe even Sforno. First of all, let me say, for some of us, I would say sometimes what's most important to us in our connection, let's say to community, to spiritual community, to religious community, is not necessarily, it's not God. It's not necessarily like, well, what's God? It's just that we belong to this ancestral community, or there's it's the communal aspect or the God of our ancestors that's most important. It's because our parents, our grandparents worshipped a certain way. So one way to look at this text or the series of descriptions of God here to begin with is an easy way in, a hook when you introduce when you introduce yourself or you're introducing someone else, is to associate them with something that somebody else already knows. An easier way to say that is, God is saying to Moses, listen, it wouldn't make sense if God went on a very high level first. And God didn't even say first. Moses had to ask, what's your name? Like, what should I tell the Israelites? God wouldn't have said necessarily first, I'm this becoming God. That's too high of a level of an encounter, of a way to introduce oneself. So God said, listen, I'm the God of your ancestors. Okay, so there's level one here of our connection to community, our ancestral heritage, to an ancestral God. When Moses says, who am I? And I already hinted at this earlier. God says, it doesn't matter who you are. It matters that we're partners. I'm with you. And there's a sense of God here as a nurturing, a supportive God, a wellspring of resources. And again, I would say I somehow find myself thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a little bit different. I think the Maslow expresses, I don't have the triangle in front of me, but first, sometimes maybe we connect to community. Then we're nurtured, or we're emotionally nurtured. We find inner resources or resources from those who love us and care about us. And only then can we really conceptualize God on a higher level. And as one of the things I read, Aviva Zorenberg, a beautiful modern contemporary commentator based in Israel, wrote, much ink has been spilled about Ahaya Asher Ahaya. It's not only like this sense of evolving or this unknowable sense or different expressions of God. There's so many ways we could understand Ahaya Asher Ahaya. I am what I am. I will be what I will be. And we're going to continue to look at those over the next few minutes. But engaging in that big question about what is God, that is level 3. So we have in this text, I would say, and building on what Cantor Neil Short said earlier, a different ways of connecting with God. Sometimes for us, it's just about communal connection. Sometimes it's about being nurtured and allowing ourselves to be spiritually or emotionally supported. And sometimes it's about engaging in as high level of a conversation or as high level with high level questions as much as we can. So with that said, I want us to take a look at Rashi, who died at the beginning of the 11th century, and read his commentary and think about, how does this connect to the things that we've already discussed about Asher Ahaya? I will be what I will be. I am a becoming God. I am a different kinds of God. What does Rashi add here for us? It's not necessarily an easy question or answer, but let's look at it together. So can I have a volunteer to read in English the Rashi here? Steve, I see your raised hands. I know you might have had a question before, but would you like to just read this very brief text?
Yeah, I just actually had a question, but I can ask.
Can you hold? Yeah,
Sure.
That would be great. Thank you. That would be great. Thank you. Okay, you ready to read? Okay, I don't know what happens to Steve. Can someone else jump in and quickly read this Rashi for us? Anyone? There are like 200 people on this call. Can someone's voice other than mine read for like 20 seconds? Okay, Cantor Mark, you're our reader for today.
Oh, okay. I just want to make a comment about the Asher,
Oh,
because it is.
Mark, I apologize. 1 second. Mark Schneider, I need you to hold your question for a moment. Cantor
Sure.
Mark Backrack. I would like you, I think you volunteered to read our Rashi, so let's do it.
Oh, I can't read that.
Ehiyeh, Ehiyeh Asher Ehiyeh. I will be with them in this sorrow at the hands of I who will be with them in the subjection they will suffer at the hands of other kingdoms. Brachot 9b. Whereupon Moses said to him, Lord of the universe, why should I mention to them other sorrows? They have enough with this sorrow. God replied to him, you have spoken rightly. This is what you should say.
Okay, so let me explain the Rashi here, and then we're going to talk about what Rashi adds. Cantor Mark, thank you for reading. I'm going to go back here. Sorry, I'm going to scroll up. Okay, so first of all, one of the, I would say, popular ways that Ehiyeh, Asher Ehiyeh is described, not only simply, I will be what I will be, I am a God who's changing, growing, becoming, I am a God that manifests myself in different ways over time. It's also, and I think very fitting to some extent here, this is somewhat debatable, but I'll say anyway, the Jewish God is not necessarily a God of up here, theologically centered, where there's lots of discussion about what God is. At least in the Hebrew Bible, the God of the Israelites is a God of action. It's a God, and I'm sure you've heard this in some way before, a God that manifests itself through story, through history, through actual events. And so when Moses says, what do I tell the people when they say, who's this God? God says, you got to convince them that they don't have to worry about it, that I'm going to be with them in the same way I mentioned, Ehiyeh, I'm going to be with you. Ehiyeh, Asher Ehiyeh. I'm going to manifest myself as stories, as history, as actions, as events unfold. So I will be what I will be signifies an action-oriented God of not a God that is a noun, a God that is a verb, a God that acts. What Rashi does here is he specifies even further what that God of action is doing in the context of our story. So he says, Ehiyeh, I will be with you during this trial and tribulation, during this challenge, while you are enslaved, and I will bring you out. And Asher Ehiyeh, I will also be with you. I will be that which I will be. I will be with you, and I will further be with you. It's a little bit of a stretch, but nevertheless, that's what he's saying. And in fact, Moshe says to God, Rashi reads this into the text, whoa, that's too much for people to grasp. We're talking about a serious enslavement problem right now. Let's just talk about your being with the people during the enslavement problem. And so what we read right after is Moshe saying, okay, God responds to Moshe in this dialogue that we don't see here, that Rashi reads into the text. Okay, just Ehiyeh has sent me to you. Just a God who's going to save you. Still a God of action, a God of a verb or of many verbs, a God that's going to do many things to get you, to redeem you, to get you out of this land where you're slaves. And also a form of the word Ehiyeh, which has the root either Hey Yud Hey or Hey Vav Hey, is the name for God used throughout the Torah. Yud Hey Vav Hey. God will be. So again, we move from a more complex God of I will be what I will be, manifesting, becoming, a God of many actions over time to just know, I'm the God of your ancestors. I'm the God who's going to redeem you from Egypt. So that's Rashi's explanation, which is a little bit complicated, but okay. So let me pause there and see if there are any clarification questions just on what Rashi says, and then we will sort of try and make our way to conclude. Okay, so are there clarification questions on Rashi? And I think I will try and repeat one more time what Rashi says. So Rashi is saying not only is God a God of action over time, a God whose definition unfolds during historical events, but specifically here, God is the God who's going to save the Egyptians, could save the Israelites from their slavery by the Egyptians, and a God who's going to save the Israelites in future times. That's why Ehiyah is used 2 times. Signifies God's actions now and God's actions later. God's actions now, Ehiyah, and God's actions and unfolding through events in actual time later. So if there are no specific questions if everyone's clear on Rashi, I am curious, does Rashi's commentary resonate with you? Or does it perhaps not resonate with you at all? Does it fall flat in any way? It is a little bit confusing, but wonder if there are reactions here to Rashi. Okay, Mark Schneider, did you want to respond to that question? I know you had your hands up before. You got to unmute.
Yeah, I have a comment that basically about the I'm not about Rashi as much as about the Asher Ayah. I mean Ayah Asher Ayah, and
Okay.
that, and I just wanted to comment about that. In that, Moses says, "What am I going to tell the people? What is the name?" And God says, "Tell the people, my name is Ayah." And it's so clear. This is the first time, other than maybe before this, God has given us his name. Yeah. And yet we use Adonai and Elohim and Hashem. And God is very specific. My name is Ayah for the people. All the people, for the Israelites, this is what I am to be known as. And we don't use that name. Have we missed something? Has Judaism missed the boat?
That's quite a provocative question. It's so interesting because you're right. We don't, even though, as Aviva Zorenberg writes, much ink has been spilled on what this means. It's a great question.
All right.
Look, yeah.
Back. I'm done.
Somebody needs to mute. Yod He Vav He is the name that's used throughout the Hebrew Bible. Yes, Elohim also, but definitely Yod He Vav He. I would say, I'm not sure we've missed the boat on the exact name Ehiyah, because we essentially use the same word. We just use it in the third person. We use Yehiyah or Yahweh. But it's true that over time Jews stopped pronouncing that. Have we lost sight of the meaning of God's, like maybe a more spiritual approach to God, God becoming, God manifesting in different ways, God as a God of action? Maybe we have. I think it's hard for all of us, maybe not all of us. I think it's hard for many of us to stay up here with our understanding of God all the time. So I don't know if coming back to it once a year on the Torah portion is good enough, but I do think maybe you're right. Maybe we don't spend enough time thinking about the nature of God, especially the nature of God based on this text. So certainly glad we're doing it today. Okay, any other I just have to take one more on the Rashi or anything else in this moment. And I'm going to actually call on Cheryl because that was the second hand that I saw a few moments ago. So Cheryl Aronson, Rashi or something else.
Well, actually, I don't have anything, but I just want to point out that Esther has had her physical hand up.
Oh, I can't. Yes, I don't see Esther actually. So
yeah, that's why I wanted to point it out.
Okay.
Because having a physical hand up is harder to see.
Yes, I do not see that. So, okay. So Esther, do you want to unmute and share your?
Yeah, you should be able to unmute now. Great.
Well, I had two comments. The first one was about the name. I'm not talking about God's name. I was thinking of Moshe, and in the same root you have the word neshama, the soul. So in Jewish tradition, the name is so important, and the fact that the soul is part of the name, I thought was interesting. And my second comment, you talked about the Amidah and the three fathers. Beside the first, that we talk about Iches, fathers, but in the Amidah, we attribute the morning prayer to Abraham, the afternoon prayer to Isaac, and the evening prayer to Jacob.
It's true. That is a tradition. Thank you. That is absolutely a rabbinic tradition.
Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have a question.
We need to move on. I apologize. I appreciate everybody keeping their comments brief. And it's almost our official end time, and I am going to go over for a few minutes, probably 5. So I apologize. We do need to move on. So I want to point out one more commentary, which is maybe more, it might speak to people more. I don't know. So Sforno, a much later commentary, a 16th century commentator, and I'm just going to have it in front of us. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Focuses based on Ezekiel 18, which I highly recommend. Just make sure it's 18, not 19. 18. A fascinating chapter in the Hebrew Bible about how reward and punishment is only earlier in the intellectual and the religious history of the Hebrew Bible. Children could be punished for the sins of their parents, but some of the later prophets say absolutely not. Only individuals are punished for what they do. Parents are punished for what they do. Children are punished for what they do and are rewarded also. So Ezekiel's a fascinating chapter about that, and also ends with this verse about God loving, God not wanting anyone to die, God wanting people to live and be rewarded. So based on that chapter, Sforno says, God loves all existence, and Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh, about a God that's becoming, that is, that will be. That's the God who loves existence. And the purpose of existence is justice and righteousness. And so in the context of our chapter, Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh means I am a God that loves and values foremost righteous and just existence. And that is the exact opposite of the society that Egypt is creating, particularly the slave society that Egypt is creating for the Israelites. And so I am going to destroy them. So God as existence, as in God's essence is existence, is, I think, a beautiful interpretation of I will be what I will be. And specifically an existence that is almost synonymous with righteous and just behavior. So what I actually want to do at this moment is kind of try and bring together some of the ideas we've encountered. I know we have gone up here, and I want to kind of try and wrap up in an extremely clear way. So slightly color-coded, but you can read the Eitz Chaim piece on your own a little bit. So what we've done is talk about a few different aspects of God. certainly a God of our forefathers, that for some of us at sometimes in our lives, that's the easiest God to connect to. The God that our communities worship, and maybe even we understand God in that way. In a very broad way, we connect to community. It's not necessarily up here with God, or however, it doesn't have to be up here, but it's not necessarily in an uber spiritual way or an uber intellectual way that we're connecting, just connecting with our forefathers, or our spiritual or ancestral forefathers. I also suggested to you at the very beginning that when Moshe says, who am I to go to the Israelites? What am I doing? God says, I will be with you. I am a supportive God. I can be your partner. Eheyeh. The God Eheyeh is a God of, I'm suggesting here, compassion, a God in relationship to us, a God that gives us resources, a God where we don't feel alone. And yet, Moshe also asks God, well, what do I tell the Israelites? And at first, God says, well, tell them. I will be what I will be. I will be a God that unfolds in action. Maybe two different kinds of approaches here. Maybe that's a very transcendent God, a mysterious God. I will be what I will be. It sounds quite mysterious. And at the same time, we've also interpreted this as a God who unfolds, a God that we can experience through action, an immanent God, a God that lives present in the world with us. And if you read the Eitz Chaim above, the Eitz Chaim commentary also says that, in fact, we can connect to God in our present too, through laws, through rituals, through our own actions. It's not just we are created in the image of God. And so we connect to God not only by seeing the way God manifests in the world, but the way we manifest in the world. And we also mentioned, as Rashi says, that God is a God of multiple trials and tribulations. And that's a very difficult concept given events of the recent past. But nevertheless, that's a suggestion that I think we can't avoid from Rashi. And as was mentioned, one of the first comments that was mentioned, I think it was Jay, who mentioned earlier, that as Eric Fromm says, the God of Eheyeh, Asher Eheyeh, can also be seen as the God of becoming. We're always growing. God is always growing and becoming, and we relate to God differently over time. So we have a lot of different ways of understanding God just from Moshe's dialogue with God here, from the sort of more simple ancestral God, a God of compassion, a God that supports us, to a God that we really struggle to understand, whether that's perhaps a transcendent God or an immanent God, a God with us here on this earth, or a God that's really mysterious and difficult to conceive of. So I think, as Cantor Neil mentioned at the beginning, there are many, I think there are 200 of us or something like that on this call right now. I don't have the number right in front of me. But, we're all going to relate to God a little differently. Or some of us might call ourselves agnostic or atheist, and yet we still have a relationship with spirituality or a higher power or a higher purpose. So I would suggest that this Torah portion is so important, and we should not miss the boat. And I'm in agreement with Mark Schneider, I believe, who said earlier, we should not miss the boat, and we're not missing the boat today, because this is our job. When this Torah portion comes up every year and even beyond, we should be thinking about what is God, whether sometimes that's a more simple conception of God, or we engage in this kind of high-level analysis. So I wish us each not only a Shabbat Shalom, but maybe a Shabbat of reflecting on theology, and the theology that makes sense for you right now at this time in your life. So with that, I will close out, and I'll take a few moments to read the chat, skim through the chat as much as I can before we end. And if you want to email me, of course, I put my email in earlier, abby@explorejewish.com. You're welcome to do that, and I will do my very best to get back to you in a timely way. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And if you enjoyed Today, you're welcome to learn the Parsha with me every Wednesday night through the 92nd Street NY, 92 NY in New York. You can look further up at that link, or you can just Google. So thank you so much, everyone, again.
Thank you so much, Abby. Shabbat shalom to you all. We hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.